Oh, finally. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming back on. Welcome to the Darshan Talks podcast. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist. I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have an interest in an FDA regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. Today's podcast is going to be awesome. We're going to talk to a person with his own Wikipedia page. We're going to talk to someone who has changed the way people think about emerging sort of technologies and how they affect life sciences. So if you are a person with an interest in the life sciences, if you are in marketing, if you are a technologist, if you are a CEO wondering where we should go next, if you are wondering what are the limitations to that, this is the podcast for you. Our guest is, let me get this. I want to make sure I get this right. Is the CEO of Encryption and the author of Who Owns You. He is. When I looked him up and I was talking to him, what was evident is that he's passionate about the many changing technologies, and unlike most people who focus on one of them, he's focused on a few of them. So there are so many questions I have for him. Our guest for today, Dr. David Koepsell. How are you, David?
I'm good. How are you doing, Darshan? It's nice to meet you, and it's good to talk.
Thanks for coming on. So let's start from the beginning. Let's talk to me a little bit more about how you even came to, and I'm going to start from what feels like self-serving, but I'm just curious. How do you get your own Wikipedia page?
So I was executive director of a not-for-profit back in 2000, and I think it's 2003, maybe sooner. I don't recall. It's so long ago, a different lifetime. At that time, I had already had my first book published, and I was a lawyer and a philosopher, but that sort of was a internationally prominent role, and a lot of the people I was working with had prominence in the field, so it seemed to be something that was sort of thrust upon me.
Some people are born great, others have greatness thrust upon them, I guess. You might meet a little bit of both. Let's ask the question that goes with it. You said you were working with some prominent people, so it sounds like you were dealing with some really interesting topics at that time.
So the Center for Inquiry was founded by Dr. Kurtz, who was a very prominent skeptic and philosopher and a public philosopher, really, and had published numerous books. And I was interacting with people like Daniel Dennett and Murray Gell-Mann. I went on a trip to China with them, and lots of really important scientists. And I was just a young chap in my 30s.
Okay, and what was Dr. Kurtz a skeptic of?
So he was proponent. He was the creator of the Center for Inquiry, which had the Council for Secular Humanism and the Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, CSICOP, in other words. So they were skeptics about all sorts of things, deism and claims about the supernatural, and published a number of, they still do, publish Free Inquiry and Skeptical Inquirer, and great magazines. And I've been editor and contributor to those for almost 20 years now. So various articles and sections.
So how does a philosopher and a lawyer get involved in that part of the world, and then eventually become involved in blockchain and get involved in owning DNA?
I feel like I'm a pinball sometimes. But the short story is I met my wife, Dr. Gonzalez, who is a genomic scientist. She does pharmacogenomics. Okay. We met in Buffalo while I was working at CFI, and she got me interested in genomics. Now, I had written in the past about intellectual property and software. That was my first book, Ontology of Cyberspace. And I started just delving into the subject. I read every book she suggested, and I started to learn about genomics. And it fascinated me because of the connection of intellectual property issues, which I was already involved in philosophically with an Ontology of Cyberspace. And I learned along the way that there were all these patents being granted to genes. So that fascinated me and provided me an opportunity that really changed my whole world. I applied for a fellowship at the Yale Interdisciplinary Center for Bioethics, and there I worked on the book Who Owns You, that came out in 2009. By that time, I had taken a job in the Netherlands, my tenure track job at the University of Delft, Technical University of Delft. I 3 months after my book came out about gene patents and why we should get rid of them, the ACLU sued to do just that, and you know what happened after that. So I was along for that ride.
And hold on. Let's not.
Yeah.
I may, but let's talk a little bit. What happened?
Sure.
What happened with that?
Okay, so yeah, the ACLU sued Myriad Corporation, which had two very important and valuable patents on genes, the BRCA1 and 2 genes, I met a wonderful group of people, both at the ACLU and who were opposing this. One of whom might be in the audience today, my friend Kevin Noonan, who's a great guy and an attorney, and a patent attorney. Anyway, so the point of their lawsuit was that these genes that were patented, the BRCA1 and 2 mutations, were making it impossible for, making it very expensive for people to get tested, because you couldn't at the time test for the presence of those genes without violating the patent, because you have to replicate the art, and you have to replicate the patented gene. So their lawsuit went all the way up to the Supreme Court. My arguments were philosophical. I was making arguments on the claims that there was something inventive, that, and I have a broader philosophical notion that intellectual property law is kind of confused anyway, which started in my first book. So these are ontological arguments, but the legal arguments that were brought before the Supreme Court convinced the Supreme Court in a unanimous decision in 2013 to overturn gene patenting of unmodified genes. After that, there was this sort of lacuna. There's this great gap. How can people, first of all, what's going to incentivize people to do the research? And second of all, how are people going to make any claims to what we think of as a sort of personal property? So that's where the whole Who Owns You thing led, and then led me to encryption directly, because after that decision, there's this big gap. How are we going to promote the science that Dr. Gonzalez, my wife, needs? And my concern as a bioethics professor was, how are we going to make sure the next Henrietta Lacks isn't left out of the stream of commerce and the revenue that comes from these inventions and discoveries.
It's interesting to say that, and I want to discuss a bunch of the topics you just sort of raised, but I don't know if you saw yesterday's news, but I think it was a Harvard professor who came out and said that I'm putting my gene sequence on an NFT.
Yeah, George Church. Yeah, not just some Harvard professor, a really important guy in genomics.
Talk to me a little bit about what happened there. What's the logic there? What do you think about it? What's your take?
Okay, so I've interacted with George for a while, because he has a company that we thought was going to be competing with us, but ended up into a sort of different space than ours. But I think first of all, a couple of weeks prior, I released an NFT of my genome.
Did you? I didn't know that.
It's sold already. It's sold for half an ethereum, which is not bad considering the price of ethereum. Yeah. But we did it as art because I don't think, technologically speaking, turning genomes into NFTs is a really helpful way to deal with the data. NFTs are meant to give you a claim to some sort of digital thing, right? Now, they're only as good as the laws behind them. So I could create a NFT to a unique shade of purple.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me the owner of that unique shade of purple. The same is true for genomic data. And other companies have tried to say, well, we can solve this problem of gene ownership through NFTs, but there's a fundamental problem with that, and there's no law that says that anybody can own genomic data. So it doesn't solve the problem. It's an interesting use case. I hope George's NFT sells for a beeple amount of money, and then we'll see what we can do with it scientifically. So the problem we're solving scientifically, I think, is more immediate and practical, and that is making sure there's lots of data out there for scientists to have access to, and making sure people get paid for that data. And that's what our platform does, using a blockchain and using a unique cryptocurrency. Of course, I'm working from home, so you can hear my doorbell and my dog barking.
I have a dog, believe me. He's curious.
Every webcast.
It's all good. So let's address that first question, because there's so many questions that come out of it. My first question is, so you sold your genome via NFT for half a Ethereum.
Right.
Is that right? Okay.
We sold artwork that was derived.
That's what I was trying to figure out.
Yeah.
So you sold the artwork. What does that mean? Just the visual representation of it, not the data itself, or what does that mean?
I worked with a great artist, Michael Connolly from the UK, and he used generative algorithms to take the raw data from my 23andMe file and turn it into a unique piece of art. And that's a process we can replicate with anybody's, and it will turn out slightly different for everybody. So it's really just an aesthetic representation of my genome. The person who owns it has no rights to the data. They just can claim they own this originally minted NFT. So that's why it's not helpful to solve the remuneration problem that we're solving. That's why it's not helpful in science. The access to the data is not the issue. Making sure people are paid for access to the data is the issue. And ensuring that data gets used many, many times is also part of the issue. And if you're trying to curtail the reuse of that data by trying to mint these unique objects, these digital objects, you're not really serving science or solving the problem of making sure people get paid. So there are other solutions to these issues that are maybe on the horizon. But in the meantime, we think that the best way to deal with it is have a free market for the sort of data that is already being traded by companies like 23andMe to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars.
So that was going to be my first question. You sold a visual representation of your data, while the data itself, I assume 23andMe asserts, and I'm speaking for a company who has nothing, I don't represent them in any way, right. But they would assert that they already own that data because they sold it. So
there's no ownership claim. So this is the thing us lawyers have to constantly explain to people, that although possession is 9/10 of the law, it isn't ownership. And the bounds of ownership so far don't expand through the law to claims over data.
Okay. So what did they sell then?
Well, 23andMe is selling and reselling people's genomic data aggregated into, aggregated data sets. So a pharmaceutical company comes to them and says, I want all, males over 50 from Europe with, this particular RSID, this variant. And they'll send them an aggregated data set of that data. And some metadata about those users, but they sell and resell that data all the time as this aggregated useful data set. But they don't have an intellectual property claim to it under existing laws. There is, as you know, there is no way to own the raw data. What you own is the particular expression of the data in some way. So maybe they have some sort of proprietary packaging of that data that they can lay claim to, but they never own anybody's genome, and nobody can at this point.
So let me clarify that sentence. Nobody can own the data. Does that mean including the person whose data it is, i.e.
Especially, yeah, that's the big gap, that still exists. We don't have a ownership claim over our genetic data.
Right.
Nobody does. So before the Myriad case, I suppose you might have patented your own genome, right?
Yeah.
That might have been an interesting approach. But because the Supreme Court says nobody can own an unedited genome, there's no path for that through patent law. And there is no existing legal regimen in which somebody can exert an ownership claim to their genomic data. So we have a problem. One is making sure people are compensated for the use of that data and making sure that data still gets out there for scientists to do really important science. The way 23andMe and Ancestry are dealing with that is by packaging up these aggregated data sets for pharmaceutical companies and other researchers who pay a lot of money for access to those data sets. But there's no reason, and this is why we did what we did. We can't have a disintermediated marketplace like ours, where anybody can go to it and upload their data, add some metadata, and then allow any researcher they want to do those searches and get that data themselves, paying directly for it. And that's why we think this sort of demonopolized, decentralized approach is more ethical. It compensates people, and it still solves the issue of data scarcity by making sure that people can participate in free markets.
So let's ask a couple questions that come out of that. The first question I have is, how does this play nice with the various, and to the extent you've looked into it, I don't know if you have, but how does it play nice with the various states' biometric privacy laws? That's go ahead.
Yeah, so genomic data so far is not covered by those laws, by by either HIPAA or the various attempts to create privacy rights in biometric data. De-identified genetic data is very important, and all of the companies that use it have been very clear in their need to access it. So none of the current laws curtail the use and reuse of that data or prevent others from buying or selling it. So far, so good. Even the GDPR allows that, and GDPR is kind of like is a little harsher than California. So yeah, well, we'll see if that remains the case. I don't see, given the value of that data, as I've said, hundreds of millions of dollars have changed hands, so that companies can access that data and use it in really important science. So we'll see if that remains the case. I expect it will remain the case. I don't have the lobbying clout that the pharmaceutical companies have, but I think people should be able to sell de-identified genomic data, and anybody should be able to buy it and use it for science.
So let's ask that question about de-identified genomic data. One of the things they always talk about is, especially around data itself, so I'm not connecting to genomic data, you can always re-identify the data.
Not always, but you're right. It's possible to do so with a lot of it.
Correct. In the case of de-identified genomic data, one of the things I've heard is that crime and enforcement agencies reach out to these organizations and say, could you give me whatever data you have that's similar? So now it's not a question of data claim and data ownership, but data privacy. Right. How has that come to play out now, as you see it from a philosophical standpoint, on your right to privacy? Because it's not even your data. It might be your cousin 3 times removed, but now you can say that we know that this is the source of that data. So how does that play out, do you think? And do you should you have a right to go, no, you can't find me using that methodology. That's not copacetic, for lack of a better term. That's the technical.
So that's a really important problem, and one in which I have no really good answer. The problem is the cat's out of the bag. There's 50 million people who've been tested, And
Yeah.
from those 50 million, you can probably reach everybody in the United States, just numerically speaking. The way that makes that data re-identifiable is not the genomic data itself, but its connection with some other data that the user has provided.
Yeah.
So in the case of these big testing companies, right, you provide all sorts of identifiable information. If you go buy a test from 23andMe or Nebula Genomics, et cetera, you got to give them your address to get that test. You got to unless you do a drop, right? You get a mail secret box somewhere and you get a drop and use a pseudonym. You're already on the hook for them knowing who you are. Because they've sent you the test, and you've probably paid for it. So now they have access to your, all sorts of financial data if they want. The re-identification comes from the combination of the genomic data with all this other data that they can re-identify you with, and then all this self-reported health stuff. So 23andMe bugs me every month. Please fill in your health data. Try to help science. Tell us. Do you smoke, etc. All of that is what makes it re-identifiable and risks your privacy. So our system tries to prevent this by not asking you for any personally identifiable information you don't want to give. And you can still use the service. You can provide, a fake email and the file, and that's it. And then you're using our service. And there's almost no way that you could be re-identified with a fake email and a raw text file from 23andMe that we strip off the date because we're so paranoid. So we don't know the date of the test. So that risk of your invasion of privacy through all these other services is, as I think I said, the cat's out of the bag on that. It pretty much is, and it's not just because 50 million people have had genetic tests. It's because 350 million Americans have so much personal information out there. We can be re-identified through any number of ways.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. Sort of. I'm gonna go the other way. Play devil's advocate.
Okay.
I gave you my data. You were kind enough to de-identify it, and I gave you a bad email address. All good. Turns out my DNA contains the cure to all cancers, and now you're going, I need this information. I'm happy to pay you for all the things I could. How do you address that from an ethical viewpoint of going, I maybe need to go backwards and forcefully re-identify this person?
We leave that up to the user, to the individual. So actually, we have a reflexive part of our service where a researcher who wants to find out more about a person that they've used their data from can send a survey to them and offer to pay them to fill in data for that.
Have you had requests like
that? I'm sorry?
Have you had requests like that yet or not yet?
We don't know. We're not in the loop on that. So another way we protect you is by basically letting researcher and subject deal with each other themselves. So that's another way. If we're out of the process, if we're not looking at the data and we're not seeing, that communication, then you're even more protected.
So you allow that communication to happen, and you don't get involved in the process of what happens. But that's assuming that you gave the right email address.
That's right. I mean, if somebody doesn't give the right email address, they can't really get paid. So you have to use an email address to log into our service and to access the wallet. So if somebody's buying their data and they want to use that money, they have to be able to. They're using a real email address, even if it's a fake name, etc.
Now, do you foresee a scenario where a person gave the email address, didn't really just want to be private, wanted to get the data? I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me.
It's okay. Because
choice of allergies. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So I gave you the data. I gave you the fake email address. turns out my genomic data has the cure to cancer in it. I say cancer, I recognize it's multiple cancers, but the cure to cancer in it. And I say, you know what, I don't want you to use the data. But as you put it, the cat's out of the bag. People are going, this can save many, many lives. On one hand, I 100% get the idea that with Henrietta Lacks, we did a true disservice. The poor woman was not consented in any way. But if you are not going to be consented, at the very least, I think the fact that you've helped millions is some consolation. I guess my question is, in a case like today, where my data can actually help someone and that data is being collected, should scientists, and when I talk to scientists, they go, yeah, we should, because science is the most important. But should scientists have the right to use the data anyways if it benefits humanity and it's not for commercial purposes in some way? How do you balance that?
Yeah, no, I think that we can all be thankful that the HeLa cells were so useful in science, and regretful of Henrietta Lacks not getting properly recognized or paid for that. And you know, I also write a lot about the ethics of science, and I do think that there is a general duty of inquiry, and as long as, you know, we are providing some sort of recognition of the source of the goods that come out of science, then science should pursue those goods. So the short answer is, scientists have a duty to pursue the truth through research, unless there is some legal barrier, and ethically have a duty to recognize those who contribute. So one of the benefits of our platform is we have an audit trail that will always show through our blockchain that this thing that saved humanity came from Joe Blow over here. So we can always recognize that, and Joe Blow may choose or not choose to reveal their true identity, and that's up to them.
It's literally like a genetic Satoshi Nakamura, or a tomb of the soldier. I forget what it's called, but you don't know who it is, but you're just thankful for them being there.
That's right. Unless they choose to reveal themselves, and then they can show you. Then, yeah, this is definitely my wallet. I'm the person who saved humanity with my genome, if they want.
That sounds like a great place to actually end this conversation, because we could keep going in 1,000 different places. David, couple of quick questions. What is a question you'd like the audience to answer for you?
So I would like to know what's keeping everybody from getting genetically tested. I've done it. My whole family's done it. We're really cool about the science, and we think we have a solution to the remuneration issue. But lots of people are reticent. These companies have reached a sort of plateau with their testing that has, a lot of people are wondering if there's going to be more. So I want to know what's keeping you from getting tested if you haven't been tested.
By the way, we have one person who's just responded going, this is an awesome conversation. I happen to
agree
with
Connie. Yeah, I love these talks. I am always regretful when they end.
I'm going to answer the question for you. For me, it comes down to, I just don't like having my data available to people. It bothers me. I hate that I leave a breadcrumb trail as I surf the internet. It bothers me even more that I could actually do that at a physical level. So that would be the reason why I don't want to get the testing done, because I don't think it necessarily benefits me. In my head, I'm very clear that I have very clear Indian roots, and the further clarification doesn't help me any. We can have a very different conversation. I'd love to have you back to have this conversation on pharmacogenomics and how this all ties into pharmacogenomics.
Yeah.
But at this moment, I don't think we have all that data yet.
Okay.
So So I would love to have that conversation with you soon, and maybe even bring your wife to have that conversation, because she can
Oh,
add
she'd
some.
love to. Yeah, she's much smarter than me and much more interesting.
I'm sure she's very interesting, and I'm sure she's very smart. But you've been an amazing guest, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
During this podcast, I get to ask. I'm going to ask two quick fire questions.
You bet.
The first one: what challenges you?
Oh, well, besides the global pandemic,
Yeah. Besides that one.
yeah. So I think balancing my desire to spend time with my kids against my duties to the company and society, and maintaining my moral center all in the process.
That leads me to the next question, which is, what is the best part of your job?
Oh, the best part of my job is being my own boss. So I've had many jobs, and I've had many bosses, and having that ability to compare, it's better to be your own boss. And I think knowing that at the end of the day, I've created something that people use.
Very, very cool. So I'm going to do a quick summary. During this conversation, we spoke a little bit about your journey. We spoke about your work with Dr. Kurtz and with Daniel Dennett. You spoke a little bit about your relationship, your marriage with Dr. Gonzalez, and her experience in pharmacogenomics, which took us down this path of who owns you. And we talked a little bit about gene patents. We talked about the seminal cases in that. We talked a little bit, and I want to get into this next time, on your quote, IP law is confused. I want to get into how you sold your, well, we briefly discussed how you sold your genomic data as art, and you talked a little bit about Dr. Michael Connolly and his unique art, if you will. We spoke a little bit about the role of biometric laws and how they, if at all, impacted the sale and the privacy issues associated with the data that we have. We also talked about aggregated data content, and then you spoke about this concept, which I really want to explore the next time you come on, the duty of inquiry, which I'm not sure I've heard of that being an affirmative duty.
Okay.
But maybe it exists. I just haven't heard of it. It didn't come up for me in law school. But I'd like to explore that a little bit more as well.
Sure.
Did I miss anything?
Well, just a couple corrections. I didn't work with Dan Dennett. I wish I had. He was involved in the work I was doing at the Center for Inquiry. I think you promoted the artist Michael Connolly to a PhD. Yep. I don't believe he has a PhD, but maybe he should get one, an honorary one at least. He's done great work. And yeah, we have a lot of topics for the next conversation, all of which I'm happy to delve into in depth.
That's awesome. Just to be clear, because we're both lawyers, nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It's intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, where can they reach you to?
Oh, they can find me on my webpage, davidkoepsell.com. That has links to all my other roles and involvements, and they can find me on LinkedIn. So Dr Koepsell is at gmail.com is a sort of universal way to reach me, and that's David Richard Koepsell. I didn't have a doctorate when I created that email.
Fair enough. And I should also clarify that you have a company Encryption, which you mentioned a few times. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how they can find the website? And what
so encryption.com. If you, I think you have that in, or I can put it in the chat or whatever.
Feel free to put it in the chat. We'll put it in the show notes as well.
Okay. So anybody can go there, and if you've done a test through one of the big testing companies, they can create an account simply, and even if they haven't got that data yet and want to, they can create an account and then upload when they're ready that data and see if researchers will buy it from them for their research.
Perfect. And that's encryptgen.com, just for those of you who are just listening in.
That's right. Yeah, my
and-
mom came up with that name. I want to credit her for that. It was her. I didn't know what to call the company. I'm not good with names.
I'm 100% with you. I'm completely not creative about it. So if you like this podcast, please leave a comment, please subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter or go to our website at darshantalks.com. David, it was so good having you on. So thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Darshan. I hope to see you soon.
Soon for sure.